Mr. President, I rise today because it's inevitable that at some point in the near future, President Trump will have to convene his national security team in the Situation Room at the White House in response to a global crisis, whether in Ukraine or the Taiwan Strait or some other hotspot. The Situation Room is a room that I've had the privilege of working in as a staff on the White House National Security Council. It's a room where the most consequential decisions are made, where the safety and security of our country is decided, where the lives of people are determined. But who will be in the room with the president, advising the president during these difficult and stressful times? As the president sits at the end of the table, flanking him are some of the most senior advisors. One of them closest to him will be the Secretary of Defense. Mr. President, I rise today because I know the importance of that role in that room. I've seen what it means for the president to turn to the Secretary of Defense for counsel. In fact, I even worked at the Pentagon in the office of the Secretary of Defense. I've seen the massive operation that the Secretary needs to lead every day and what it takes. And I've seen the readiness necessary for the Secretary of Defense to turn to the President and provide the right recommendations for America's national security. Now, I have seen Mr. Pete Hegseth make his case. I've seen his answers in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I've seen the reports. I can say from my experience in the Secretary of Defense's office, as well as in the Situation Room, that Mr. Hegseth's appointment is an unnecessary risk in a dangerous global moment. Now, I get it. President Trump wants to be a disruptor. He wants to bring in people who are going to shake up the system. He wants people who represent a change from the status quo. I'm sure a number of us here in the Senate would like to see some changes at the Pentagon, changes on how things have done, understanding that the status quo is not something we can lean on. We certainly have disagreements on how best to add certainty and stability to the world that seems to be off the rails in this moment. But there is talking about change, and there is actually having the skills and the capacity to implement change. The Department of Defense is our largest employer in our government, and one that requires critical leadership. Let's look at the world that Mr. Hegseth would inherit as Secretary of Defense, the world that President Trump will ask him about in the Situation Room. On Ukraine, it's clear that Mr. Hegseth simply doesn't know his history. During his nomination hearing, he called Russia's 2014 invasion of Crimea a, quote, minor incursion. He has also downplayed the threat that Putin's Russia poses to our NATO allies. On China, Mr. Hegseth demonstrated a lack of depth of knowledge when asked by Senator Duckworth to name the importance of at least one of the ASEAN countries and the type of agreement we have with them. He could not name one. These countries include multiple treaty allies, are on the front lines of our competition with China. Multiple ASEAN members are locked in territorial disputes with China. This is a critical partner, so much that the Department of Defense 2 months ago released a strategic document called, quote, U.S. Department of Defense Vision Statement for a Prosperous and Secure Southeast Asia, that was centered on ASEAN and even mentioned that, quote, the United States has worked closely with ASEAN on defense and security in the Indo-Pacific region since former Defense Secretary Robert Gates attended the inaugural ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting in 2010. And it goes on to say that the U.S. Secretary of Defense has attended and supported ASEAN at every single one of those gatherings ever since. In a moment where these disputes could easily flare up to conflict, the president needs a secretary by his side who doesn't draw a blank on questions about our allies. And on the Middle East, Mr. Hegseth remarked that ISIS was, quote, raging across Iraq when President Trump was first sworn in to office in 2017 was simply not reflective of the reality on the ground at the time. Combined, that lack of knowledge and qualifications alone should disqualify Mr. Hegseth from this role. There is a more qualifying factor, which is his character. Now, there's been a lot said about this already in terms of personal challenges and behavior, so I'll leave it at this. Someone who is being asked to lead millions of uniformed and civilian personnel His statements on women and transgender service members are simply unacceptable. Claiming that standards have been lowered for women and that allowing LGBT Americans to serve in the military is somehow part of a Marxist agenda is beyond offensive. It's absurd. And it's far beneath the person that is supposed to be setting the standard and serving as a leader for the men and women who have dedicated themselves to protecting this country. Mr. President, I've said before that every president, including President Trump, has the prerogative to choose the people that sit at that table with him in the Situation Room. But our job here in the Senate is to make sure that those people have the competence and the character to serve our country. This is not a reality TV show. This is real life, and there are real lives at stake. Mr. Hegseth should be recognized for his service, but he should not be Secretary of Defense. And if that is not enough, we are voting also to approve someone to be the sixth in line of presidential succession. Is Mr. Hegseth ready for either of these distinctions? The answer for me is no. For the sake of our country and our national security, I encourage my colleagues who want to support this president to oppose this nomination and bring forth another nominee more qualified for the role, more ready for the role. I encourage my colleagues who want to deliver change to oppose this nomination, bring forth another nominee with the experience and credibility to deliver it. And I encourage my colleagues who want to make our country safe, who want to make our world a more stable place, and who want to leave a legacy of peace and strength to oppose this nomination and bring us a nominee ready to deliver for the American people. And I urge a vote no on Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. And I'll yield back. Mr. President.
Oh, yeah. Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I rise today because we have a crisis of confidence in our government. It's a crisis that's being driven by the Trump administration with one goal in mind: to let the well-off and the well-connected play by their own set of rules, while you, the American people, continue to scrape by. It's a crisis that puts us at a crossroads. Will we take the steps necessary to address the corruption and restore trust? Or will we break our institutions even further and usher in a golden age of corruption? In order to answer those questions, we need to have a real understanding of a few things. One, how deep is this crisis in confidence? Two, in what ways is the Trump administration putting their thumb on the scale for the well-off and the well-connected? Three, how is that impacting the rest of us? And how will it impact America's future? Four, and finally, how can we fight back? Now let's start with the crisis that we're in. When I talk about this crisis in confidence, what we're talking about is the belief that your government is working for you, that it's working for the American people, all of its people. A belief that no matter the challenge you face or the ambitions that you have, that your government has your best interest in heart. That is the fundamental credence of our democracy. That is of, by, and for the people. And that belief is always important. But when times are tough, it's even more critical than ever. Now let's be clear. These are tough times. I don't think there's a single person in America that would disagree with that. We have challenges before us. We have challenges with the high cost of living, affordability problems. It's a top issue that I hear about in my home state in New Jersey. We have a lot of crisis of confidence in this moment. about whether or not we can step up as a nation and be able to rise to the challenges that we face. And the challenges we face are significant, and we have to acknowledge that. Over the past couple years, as we've recovered from a generationally defining pandemic, I've heard from so many families who just don't believe that they can get ahead. They don't believe and think that they'll do better than their parents, and that their kids won't do better than them. And I think about that in my own family situation. My parents coming here, immigrating to this nation 50 years ago. And I remember asking them why they did it. And my parents, they said to me just one simple line. They said, "We did it because we felt that here in America, we could guarantee that the family that we raise, that you and your sister, would have a better life and more opportunities than we did." That was it. That was that simple. They weren't driven by greed. They weren't trying to take it all for themselves as if this was some zero-sum survival of the fittest. It was a sense of America and a sense of the opportunity that it can bring for everyone, including 2 immigrants from South Korea who were born during the Korean War into poverty and came to this nation. And now, as they get older, the challenges that they face, being seniors, the elderly, their health care, and other challenges that they face with their budget fixed. And now myself, as the father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, wondering what kind of America are my kids going to grow up in? And I know it's not just my family that worries about this. Because when the costs of basic goods go up, it makes it harder to save for everybody. And when families can't save, it makes it harder to achieve that crown jewel of the American dream, owning a home. Something that my family has struggled with over the years. Something that so many other families are facing right now as we see the cost of owning a home skyrocket. It puts that dream even more out of reach. And for those that can't own, even the cost of rental prices are going through the roof. Demoralizing people. I mean, I remember hearing from this young man, a recent college graduate, and he just came to me with just feeling so deflated. He said, I don't think I'm ever going to own a home. That's how he put it. And I have to tell you, just hearing that from him, just how pessimistic he was, just how demoralized he was about his place in our society. But it wasn't just about his place. It was about this moment for this country and the fact that he doesn't see us moving in a trajectory where someone like himself and people in his generation are going to be able to have that opportunity and that chance that generations before had. So you throw in that rising cost of higher education that he's struggling with, trying to pay off the bills, trying to keep up with student debt. And you have that general sense that we're losing, that sense that we're part of something bigger than all of us. And it's easy to understand why people just don't think the system that should be working for them is working for them. And that's the place that we're in right now. That in this moment we find ourselves living through the moment of the greatest amount of inequality in our nation's history. Even worse than the robber baron age that we studied about in history books. That somehow we see just such extraordinary wealth, but for just a few. Whereas the vast majority of Americans are struggling paycheck to paycheck, won't be able to step up if they face some type of crisis, a car accident or something else that could just lead them into catastrophe. That lack of trust is very clear in the numbers that we see from the American people. A Pew study from last summer showed that public trust in the federal government is at approximately 22%. And in 2023, only 16% said that the government, quote, always or most of the time is something that you can trust. According to Pew, that was amongst the lowest tally in nearly 70 years. That number was reflected in a survey conducted by the Partnership for Public Service in the spring of 2024. Their research shows that only 23% of Americans trust the federal government. That's down from 35% the year before. We're just seeing it go down and down and down. Only 15% think the government is transparent, down from 21% the year before. This erosion that we're continuing to see in our country and in the public trust has to be at top of mind. Because how can a government function? How can a democracy function with that much distrust? Alarming in that group is trust amongst people age 18 to 34, that age group of that young man I told you about who had such pessimism about his future. And in that group, we saw trust decline by half, from 30% to 15%. Now, you might think this is just maybe a red state problem. But let me tell you, it's a massive issue in my home state in New Jersey as well. In May of 2023, a poll by Fairleigh Dickinson University showed that over 80% of New Jersey residents, believe that their state's politicians are corrupt. That shows you just such a devastating number of the distrust that is out there and how widespread it is. I remember, we've certainly had our challenges of late in New Jersey, and when you see the corruption, when you hear about the news of indictments and convictions, I remember one time I went to a neighbor of mine, asked him what he thought about the state of corruption in New Jersey, and he just said, "That's New Jersey." Just threw up his hands. This sense of helplessness, this sense of apathy, this sense that that's just how things are now. There's nothing we can do about it. Now, there are a variety of reasons why this is the case in New Jersey, but it all comes back to the same thing. A singular question. Are the people in your government working for you, or are they working for themselves? Are they trying to lift up their own personal wealth, or look out for their friends or their associates, their families, for special interest? I always often felt like one of the most important questions you can get a sense from the people is this question of, do your elected officials, do your government officials care about you? Because sometimes it just feels like we're in this moment in this country where we have this crisis of empathy right now. That we are losing touch with that idea that we're part of something bigger than all of us. We're having trouble. We're struggling to be able to see the world through someone else's eyes and walk in their shoes. And in this nation of over 330 million people, how can we continue if we continue to only think about ourselves and lose sight of that which is around us? Now, obviously, this is all the more important in times like these when we need our government working to solve the problems that we face. And as we said, we face significant challenges. So what happens when we have a government where the people aren't working in the public interest, when those that are charged by the people to take up the public common good are not following through? What happens when we have a government where those people working to protect the public interest are fired, are pushed out, or marginalized? Luckily for us, history may not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The Founding Fathers established the federal workforce to be one built on merit. It was something that they took quite seriously. So seriously, in fact, that during debate in the weeks after Washington's first inauguration, James Madison stated that, quote, wanton removal of a meritorious officer is an impeachable offense. George Washington himself wrote that appointments into public service would be the most difficult and delicate part of his work. In A History of the Federal Service, a report published by the Office of Personnel Management, the evolution of this debate from one of merit first to one of political gain becomes very apparent. As political parties grew, so did the pendulum swing of retaliation and actions that further politicized public servant positions. But the dam broke just a generation after the founding of the Republic. The Tenure of Office Act of 1820, not exactly a household name, was one of the first dominoes to fall that led to what was eventually called the spoils system. By limiting the terms of many officials to 4 years corresponding to the president, it basically meant that public servants would come in and out with the tides of the presidency, and not based on need or qualifications, just the pendulum swing of partisanship, the qualification being that of loyalty rather than skill or merit. And the impact of the spoils system became very apparent, which was wholesale patronage and corruption, and a rejection of the status quo that looks very familiar to what we see today. Senator Henry Clay on the Senate floor called it, quote, a detestable system. George William Curtis, one of the leaders in the fight to reform the civil service, said that the spoils system, quote, presents a most ridiculous, revolting, and disheartening spectacle. He said that through it, the United States, quote, seethes with intrigue and corruption. Over time, the pushback against this system and the damage it did to the United States government and its people built a reform movement that eventually resulted in the passage and enactment of the Pendleton Act in 1883. In many ways, the Pendleton Act brought our public service back to its original roots, codifying it, protecting it, by calling for an open selection of government employees and creating a civil service commission, our modern civil service. And it required that the applicants pass the civil service exam. The bill was the first domino in several that helped to restore trust in government by ensuring that those that served the people and not themselves. Served the people and not just some loyalty test. In so many ways, the battle that led to the passage of the Pendleton Act continues today and answers the first question I posed. How deep does our crisis in confidence in our government go? In short, it goes back to a friction we've seen for most of our history. It's a friction between those who want to use power for their gain, to enrich themselves and their party at the expense of other Americans. And on the other side, those who seek only to swear an oath to the Constitution and to deliver on the promise of making the next American generation more prosperous and secure. To have that sense of progress as a nation, which we know we cannot take for granted. We have to work for it. So when you look at Donald Trump or look at Elon Musk, you're not seeing something new. You're not seeing the disruptors they tell you that they are. You're not seeing an innovator. you're seeing something that's very old. Just another power-hungry politician, elite figure seeking to hoard power at the expense of real American families. In this moment right now, as I said, that is the moment of the greatest amount of inequality in our nation's history. And doing that by attacking the very people who work for the people. They are not beholden to the well-off and the well-connected. Another person leading the charge to bring us back to the golden age of corruption of the 1800s is a man named Russell Vogt. Now, Russell Vogt was born to make corruption safe again. As a staffer in the House and the Senate, he worked members of both chambers who attacked and demeaned civil servants in order to get them out of the way and let big corporate interests through. He worked for nearly a decade at the Heritage Foundation, taking dark corporate money and translating it into a systematic takedown of the same protections those corporations were lobbying against. When the Trump administration came into office in 2017, Mr. Vogt was one of the first in the building at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Then, like now, senators had serious concerns when he was nominated, then for deputy director, and eventually director of OMB. Now, this brings me to my second question. In what ways is the Trump administration putting their thumb on the scale for the well-off and well-connected? Well, let's look at it. Let's look at Project 2025, Mr. Vogt's guidebook for attacking the core of the very principles that our founders wrote into the Constitution. Our founding fathers wanted to ensure checks and balances. They wanted to make sure we didn't swap one monarch for another. Vogt believes that the president has the right to stop funds that Congress has approved from getting to the places we approve them to go. That means that even if your elected officials approve money to go towards building a road, or investing in a school in your community, or trying to get your kids child care, Russell Vogt believes that Donald Trump should be able to just stop it from getting to them just because. Now, I say Donald Trump because Russell Vogt is a champion of something called the, quote, unitary executive theory. Now, I know that may sound like a half-baked physics idea, but Vogt believes that all of the power in the executive branch belongs to the president and the president alone. Mr. Vogt even said in an interview just a few months ago that, quote, there are no independent agencies. Now, warping the power of the presidency to supersede Congress and the independence of agencies that have massive authority given to them, by the way, by Congress. They have these massive authorities to protect the American people. This is core in clearing the field for the well-off and the well-connected by warping that and trying to change the fundamental balance of our government across three branches. Finally, by weakening the ability to fund the work that they do and to operate independently, it is Mr. Vogt's attacks on civil servants, the very positions put into place more than 140 years ago to stop rampant corruption and patronage. It is his attacks that threaten to bring us back in time. In a speech last year, Mr. Vogt said he wants civil servants to be, quote, traumatically affected. He said, quote, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. He went on to say, we want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them, our public servants, in trauma. Trauma. He used that word, trauma. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. This is an American who is asking for our vote here in the U.S. Senate to be confirmed as a senior government official. Someone who will lead an incredibly important part of our executive branch. Be a top advisor to the president. An American who will take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. An American who is actively saying he wants to traumatize his fellow Americans, other Americans that have also sworn that oath to our Constitution. Now, Mr. President, I may disagree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but I don't wish to traumatize them. I don't wish them harm. How is it that we have found ourselves in this place where Americans call and see other Americans as the enemy? I talk with Democrats and Republicans across New Jersey. They may have disagreements, but they don't want to traumatize each other. This is not who we are as Americans, but it's what Mr. Vote wants to inflict on the people who show up to work each and every day to serve you, the American people. These are people who are trying to serve you, not themselves. But they're being demonized. They're being attacked, disrespected. And for those he can't traumatize out of a job, he's going to try to change their status as employees of the federal government so that he can push them out. Maybe you heard of something called Schedule F. Even if you haven't, let me put it into simple terms. Russell Vogt wants to basically bring back the same policies that started the chain of events that led to the spoils system. He wants to make it so that civil servants have their protections removed, giving partisan leaders the ability to fire them and put in their own political staff. We're already hearing and seeing this. Reports that those at the White House and elsewhere are asking civil servants, asking those in jobs or seeking jobs who they voted for in the last election, about campaign donations, about party affiliation, rather than just their commitment to the Constitution. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would say that a president should have the ability to appoint their own staff, and I have agreement with that in broad strokes. But there's a reason why we have different kinds of government workers. It's because the government is meant to do the work of the people, not be completely bent to the will of a particular political party. I speak from personal experience. I was proud to be a civil servant. I believe I'm actually one of only a handful of members of Congress that currently serve that worked as a civil servant. I worked under President Bush and President Obama. I served a nation, not a party or a specific president. And that's the way it should be. And frankly, the oath that I swore as a civil servant is the same as what I recite here in this chamber. And we could all be better off if we take the mindset and approach of our civil servants. And if we just let President Trump fire civil servants and replace them with people like Mr. Vogt or the people that Mr. Vogt deems loyal enough to the president to bring on board, the protections our founders envisioned to prevent the corrupting influence of power and the corrupting power of that influence will completely override any ability to make change for the rest of us. And we are seeing this in real time right now. This leads me to my third question. What is the impact of this corruption and these attacks on our neighbors and our national security? Mr. President, the number of calls and emails and visits to my office I've gotten over the past weeks has been overwhelming. First of all, I want to thank everybody who has reached out to express their opinions and their concerns. We would be better off if we have that kind of consistent engagement from the American people, paying attention to the work that is being done in government and having their voices heard. And I want to thank my team for their service in being responsive to those concerns. Now, starting with a memo from OMB freezing federal funding, there has been panic across New Jersey and, frankly, the country about the funds that we approve as Congress, funds that are your funds as taxpayers. And they have been taken away from you by the Trump administration. I want to share a couple examples of the notes I've gotten from people in my state who are being hurt by the systematic attempt to fire civil servants and strip away programs that help working families, to clear the way for the Trump administration to let the well-off and the well-connected take control. As they get ready to plan for their big tax giveaway to the wealthiest Americans and the biggest corporations, taking that away from the rest of the American people. I got a letter from Julia, a community leader who runs an organization in Central Jersey that helps kids and seniors and people just trying to get by. She said, quote, "The new administration's pause on all activities related to obligations or disbursements of those funds for federal grants to non-governmental organizations would have an immediate and negative effect on the low-income working folks we all serve across New Jersey." She went on to say, quote, "Children in Head Start and early Head Start, quality child care and after-school services improve the physical and cognitive development while their parents pursue employment and training, that these programs would struggle. WIC, nutrition programs that provide essential access to healthy foods for pregnant women and young children, leading to lifelong health benefits, that this would be on the chopping block. Pregnant women in our maternal health programs are less likely to have preterm or low birth weight deliveries with immediate and sustained health benefits and cost savings, that would be a detriment. Medicare navigation services for seniors on fixed, low incomes are helpful and enable them to live independent and longer. And that's something they won't be able to count on. For every child raised by a kinship caregiver, our state saves thousands in foster care payments it would otherwise incur with public dollars. It matters that these programs are delivered by nonprofit organizations that provide a continuum of services that support economic activity and make our whole community more resilient. This is one organization helping tens of thousands in our state. And I want to share one quick figure that stuck out to me. One of the approximately $13 million in grants they received, they estimate an economic benefit to New Jersey of around $52 million saved. So for my colleagues not convinced by our attempts to feed children and provide health care to seniors, you might be interested to hear that providing these services is the fiscally responsible thing to do as well. Let's look at the other impacts these draconian cuts could have on New Jersey families. We should work to keep our communities safe. If these cuts persist, grants to law enforcement and homeland security activities will be cut off, putting us in danger. We should work to be prepared for disasters like wildfires and hurricanes. Public assistance and hazard mitigation grants from the Disaster Relief Fund help communities quickly respond to, recover from, and prepare for major disasters. It might not go to the many communities that are struggling after severe natural disasters. As our neighbors in New Jersey continue to recover from storms from even more than a decade ago, as Superstorm Sandy shattered so many lives, continue to wreak havoc, and many of those families still not back in their homes, our government should never abandon them. We should work to build the best infrastructure, roads and bridges and public transit and more. Take it into the next generation with universal broadband and connectivity on so many fronts that are necessary for all families. We should be able to work together to build that infrastructure so that your families can get to work and your kids can get to school and our businesses can thrive. But that funding is at risk. We should work to combat the fentanyl crisis and the mental health crisis by investing in proven programs that save lives, programs that could be on the chopping block if these cuts persist. We should invest in life-saving medical research so that this is the last generation that will have to suffer through cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes. Cutting this funding means cutting clinical trials at NIH clinical centers all across the country. The American people deserve better than that. We should work to provide the best education for our next generation. As a father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, I see every day the impacts a good education has on them. I'm myself a public school kid from New Jersey. Something that we're proud of in New Jersey. But knowing that we still have so much more work to do to make that available to everyone. This is a process we have to continue. You cannot take it for granted. Right now, Head Start programs that provide comprehensive early childhood education for more than 800,000 kids are being frozen. With teachers and staff not getting paid, programs may not be able to stay open. Child care programs could also be next to close without funding being delivered. And our K through 12 schools will lose critical funding from Title I, IDEA, Impact Aid, and other programs that can keep their doors open. Lights on in the middle of the school year. From healthcare to small business support to protecting our veterans and providing support to those suffering through hunger, the examples of the kinds of impact and the people impacted by these cuts are almost endless. And they're a reminder of who is on the losing side when corruption and corporate greed win out. And beyond the impacts of our communities, on our communities, the impacts on our national security is real. And these stories of Mr. Musk and his band of 20-somethings raiding government agencies and making threats to workers isn't some example of brave tech disruptors innovating their way to efficiency and better results. In fact, what we're seeing from this administration is quite the opposite. Stories of dangerous incompetence. Late yesterday, the New York Times reported that the White House ordered the CIA to send an unclassified email listing all the employees hired over the past 2 years. Many of these new employees were hired to help us deal with the rising challenges of China and Russia, of other threats that we face out there. Now they're effectively being exposed, made vulnerable to our adversaries because Trump administration simply wants to traumatize public servants. We are doing the work of our adversaries for them. One example of this are the attacks that we see against USAID. And as I've seen what's unfolded this week at USAID, it actually reminded me of my first moments in public service. A little over 20 years ago, I started my very first day working for the U.S. government. I remember walking up to the doors of the Ronald Reagan building because I was starting my first day at USAID. I had just graduated college, and I was proud to have a chance to serve this nation and proud to serve at a place like USAID. And it was the public servants there that showed me what community meant. Showed me that someone like me has every bit as much right to represent and to work and serve our country. Because it was something I wasn't sure about. When I first showed up to this town, I remember stepping out at Union Station, seeing the beautiful dome of the Capitol. And I was simultaneously inspired, but also terrified. I felt an imposter syndrome. Who am I to be able to represent and serve this country? I'm a son of immigrants, from a family of political nobodies. Serving this country, working in government, wasn't for me. I worked alongside public servants at USAID who helped with the rehabilitation of ex-child soldiers in Uganda. Others that worked on combating malaria and helping save millions of lives. I was working at USAID around the time of the Indian Ocean tsunami, if we remember that catastrophe, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake, killing an estimated 240,000 people in 14 nations across 2 continents. And USAID stepped up, helping support those families living in dire conditions, having faced a catastrophe unlike anything we had seen in generations, but also building towards the future, creating early warning systems across the world. It was USAID that helped deliver that to countries all across this world to help better prepare for the next disaster. Later in my career, I worked at the White House National Security Council. I was working on helping coordinate the counter-ISIS fight about a decade ago. I remember one particular moment in August 2014 where we saw ISIS going and attacking a religious minority of a people called the Yazidi people. And the Yazidis were forced out from their communities, and they fled up on top of a mountain called Sinjar Mountain, tried to take refuge there while they were surrounded by ISIS terrorists who were hell-bent on committing genocide and a mass atrocity. And we in the U.S. government were trying to figure out, what can we do? What can we do to try to help save these people, tens of thousands of people trapped on a mountain deep in enemy territory on the other side of the world? Can we help them with humanitarian airdrops? Is there a way we can build a humanitarian corridor off that mountain? Are there ways in which we can try to protect them from being annihilated? And you want to know who the first Americans were that went there? Under dangerous circumstances, deep in enemy territory. It was a USAID DART team, a disaster assistance response team, there with alongside our military, that helped the President of the United States make decisions in the Situation Room about what to do next, about whether or not we were going to decide to protect these people or not. And the President, based off of the information provided by USAID, made the decision to conduct humanitarian airdrops, be able to provide overflight coverage and be able to provide support and security to those people when we were able to get them off of that mountain. And it was one of the finest moments I had ever seen in government. On those days, I saw the best of us, and I saw a government that can inspire. We see USAID working on disease eradication, on agriculture, global health, humanitarian aid and economic growth, food security, clean water, helping with the eradication of smallpox, saving countless lives through simple oral rehydration therapies, things like that that had immeasurable countless benefits. It was a legacy that excited me when I walked up on my first day of work as a recent college grad. And then just this past Monday, I walked through those same doors at the Reagan building yet again, only to find it empty, apart from a security guard who I went up to, and he told me that he had instructions to bar and prevent any USAID employee from entering the building that day. to bar public servants from going to the office to do the work that they are entrusted by the American people to do. It was just despicable. The demonization of public servants. Now let's remember why USAID exists. That American global leadership has always been hand in hand with our foreign assistance from the Marshall Plan forward, under both Democrats and Republicans. Kennedy in 1961, he said, quote, "The program requires highly professional skilled service, attracting substantial numbers of high-caliber men and women capable of sensitive dealing with other governments, with a deep understanding of the process of economic development." He went on to say, in the face of these weaknesses and inadequacies of the previous system, that is it proper that we draw back and ask with candor a fundamental question, is a foreign aid program really necessary? And the answer to that is that there's no escaping our obligations, our moral obligations as a wise leader, a good neighbor in an interdependent community of free nations. And he said, to fail to meet those obligations now would be disastrous and in the long run more expensive. For the widespread poverty and the chaos lead to a collapse of existing political and social structures, which would inevitably invite the advance of totalitarianism into every weak and unstable area. Thus, our own security would be endangered and our own prosperity imperiled. So Kennedy went on and called for an effort to, as he said, unified administration and operation, a single agency in Washington and the field, equipped with a flexible set of tools. And this was going to be drawing upon the most competent and dedicated career servants, now in the field and attracting the highest quality from every part of the nation. And he went on to say that he wanted to ensure that this was separate from our military assistance, for instance, because he said our program of aid to social and economic development must be seen on its own merits, judged in the light of its vital and distinctive contribution to our basic security needs. And he was clear in saying this was a bipartisan legacy, one that had moved forward under the leaderships of two great presidents, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, drawn its support from forward-looking members of both political parties in the Congress and throughout the nation. And he said it's about American global leadership. Now, there's a reason why the USAID headquarters is at the Reagan building. Reagan continued that emphasis on development and humanitarian aid. He said, quote, "The ultimate importance to the United States of our security and development assistance programs cannot be exaggerated." Another quote that's actually quite apt for this moment, he said, "You know the excuses. We can't afford foreign aid anymore, or we're wasting money pouring it into these poor countries, or we can't buy friends. Other countries just take the money and dislike us for giving it." Well, all these excuses are just that, excuses. And Reagan says they're dead wrong. Now we have a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, saying USAID takes taxpayer funds and, quote, spends it as a global charity, irrespective of whether it's the national interest or not the national interest. But you know who else said that the work of USAID isn't charity, like Kennedy, like Reagan? It was Marco Rubio just a few years ago. Quote, "Foreign aid is not charity," he said. "We must make sure it is well spent, but it is less than 1% of budget and critical to our national security." Rubio went on to say, quote, "We don't have to give foreign aid. We do so because it furthers our national interests. That's why we give foreign aid." He said, quote, "Anyone who tells you that we can slash foreign aid and that will bring us balance to our budget is lying to you. Foreign aid is less than 1% of our budget. It's just not true." Look, there can always be space to review our foreign assistance. I worked in these organizations. I know there are places that we can try to fine-tune, make more efficient, make more effective. If there are programs that Congress and members of Congress have questions about, that's ripe for our oversight role. But to undermine USAID as a whole is flat wrong. We see this with Secretary Rubio's first trip this past weekend. He went to Panama, complained about Panama accepting support from China through the Belt and Road Initiative. Yet he then goes on to help Trump and Musk gut USAID, a critical tool that we have to counter Chinese influence. And it very much exposes that this America First foreign policy really means America only. And if we continue down this path, we will find ourselves alone. Over the years of our global power, our strategic advantage has always been in building coalitions. And in this dangerous global environment, this America First approach leaves us distracted from the real threats and challenges. This is about American global leadership. I think about my own family. My parents, born during the Korean War. They grew up, the very first Americans they ever met were American service members and other Americans that were there to try to help Korea rebuild. It wasn't just America's resolve in the war, it was about what happened afterwards in terms of helping provide assistance. Americans taking action to feed kids like my parents. As I said earlier, 50 years ago, my parents decided to come to America. They knew nobody here. Not a single person. They didn't know anybody in the entire Western Hemisphere of planet Earth. But my parents moved here to America because America meant something to them. It's because they met the best of us. Americans abroad, willing to work in dangerous places, in tough circumstances, wanting to try to live out the values of our country. And we learn it's not just the GDP of our nation that makes us a leader. It is the projection of our values, and ultimately, it is our people. Now we are pulling back our foreign assistance. We are closing the door to immigrants like my parents. This is, unfortunately, a moment of American withdrawal. That is not what the American people want. They wanted a government that was focused on them instead of billionaires and the biggest corporations, but they understand the importance of American leadership. When I talk to leaders and officials in other countries, I remember there was one situation where I talked to one, and he said something to me that really just stuck in my mind. He said, I just want you to know, when I talk to other leaders around the world, when we talk about America, this official I was talking about, he said, we ask ourselves the question, is America a reliable partner? And he asked that question knowing full well what the answer is, and we know what the answer is, which is we are not the reliable partner we should be. And this isn't just about USAID. We know USAID, that these attacks, it's only just the beginning. It's the canary in the coal mine. Next, it will be the Department of Education or Justice or FBI or elsewhere. Schedule F, an effort to kill the civil service, return to the spoil systems of 200 years ago. And it goes back to Russell Vogt. I want to emphasize that quote I said earlier because it's worth emphasizing in this moment. He said, quote, we want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma. When you listen to those words, doesn't that sound like exactly what happened over the last week? When I get these phone calls and texts from people at USAID, people that I worked with, texting me, telling me, quote, things are very grave, talking about how disrespected they feel. And it saddens me greatly to think that Trump and Musk and Mr. Vogt and others are relishing in that anxiety, fear, and pain that they are purposefully trying to create. In an interview with Tucker Carlson, Vogt says Trump, quote, has to move executively as fast and as aggressively as possible with a radical constitutional perspective to be able to dismantle that bureaucracy and their power centers. Now, why do you think they need to move so fast? It's because when you want to grab as much power as you can, you want to do it before the American people understand and see what's happening. They feed off the apathy and the helplessness. They want people to be disengaged. They are intentionally using terms like shock and awe, a term of war that we had used. Now they're using that against the American people. I've been saying this line a lot lately where I say I believe that the opposite of democracy is apathy. We have to stay engaged. There is a massive division in our country, no doubt about that. It's not just between Democrats and Republicans, it's between those who are engaged and those who aren't. And these actions are built to paralyze you with anger, fueled by disinformation and distraction to make you disengage. But don't let them. So what comes next? All we have to do is look at Mr. Vogt's past statements to know exactly what's coming. He said, quote, what we're trying to do is identify the pockets of independence and seize them. When he was talking about the Federal Reserve, he went on to say, quote, it's very hard to square the Fed's independence with the Constitution. That quote of his led me to ask him directly in a confirmation hearing if he believes that the president has the right to set interest rates in our country, and Mr. Vogt refused to answer. Couldn't answer something as simple as that. The answer should be very easy. It should be clearly no. And I talked to a number of leaders at the Fed recently. They really emphasized the long-standing bipartisan agreement that we do not want someone approaching critical decisions about fiscal stability in America based off of what's best for the next election for that leader. We don't want to see that kind of politicization. The goal always needs to be towards the stability of our economy and the responsibility towards growth and prosperity. Vote. He just believes in power. It's not just any kind of power. He believes in an all-powerful president, something our founding fathers specifically avoided. We don't want a monarch. We have co-equal branches of government. But is that what the American people have seen since January 20th? No, we've seen blatant power grabs, illegal actions, disregard of laws passed by Congress, chaos. But remember, as you see this, chaos is their plan. It's Trump's plan. It's Mr. Vogt's plan. It's the reason why they're going after public servants, and it's the same reason that happened 200 years ago, because public service is about serving the people, while corruption, we see, is about serving themselves. Public service was the answer to countering corruption in the 1800s, and it is my belief that it is the answer to the current threat to our democracy. When you see these attacks on public servants, when you see what is unfolding before our eyes, that's not the golden age that Trump tried to talk about in his inaugural address. It's not the Make America Great Again slogan that he's been using. It goes back to another phrase that he used over the campaign where he talked about, quote, the enemy from within. Those three words, the enemy from within. That's what this is all about. Painting our public servants who swear an oath to protect our Constitution as the enemy. Earlier, I talked about my parents coming to the United States 50 years ago. Now, my family, we think about the next 50 years. Now I'm a parent of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, 2 little boys. And I'll be honest with you, I worry about what kind of America my boys are going to grow up in. What will it look like? What will this country look like when they are my age? So that's why I'm here. That's why I stand here on the floor of the Senate. I'm here because I refuse to believe that my kids and their generation are doomed to grow up in a broken America. I still believe in the America that inspired my parents 50 years ago to travel halfway around the world for. And I know we're not the only family out there that believes in this. There is a hunger in this country for reform and change. People don't want to see the status quo, but that doesn't mean they want to hand over our country to corruption, hand it over to patronage, hand it over for another generation of the worst inequality our nation's ever seen, where every day it gets worse. As I mentioned before, we just took on and fought against machine politics in New Jersey. I heard it straight from the people. They don't want to see that kind of rise of broken machine politics across our nation. Corruption is the quickest way to take the strongest, most powerful nation in the world and send it into decline. In just a little over a year, we will have our 250th anniversary as a nation. And as I close here, I want us to reflect on that. 250 years. I hope we can commit as a nation to have that more than just about fireworks. That we use that as a moment to try to rededicate ourselves to the mission of this country, to the purpose of this nation, and why it began. After the January 6th riots, the way I framed it is I said I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to trying to solve one singular question, which is how do we heal this country? I believe the answer to that question is service. That we need a new ask not what this country can do for you moment, a reminder that we're part of something bigger than all of us. Instead of attacking public servants, we should be promoting and encouraging this. And I hope on our 250th anniversary, we rededicate ourselves to this project. Build a national service program. Invest in civics education. We need to reject the divisiveness that is infecting our nation and restore a sense of trust. We start by rejecting this dangerous nomination to do just that. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back the balance of my time. Mr. President,
Senator from New Jersey.
I have no words to describe just the absurdity of this moment and the dangers to our country and our union. For us to be able to stand here on the floor of the Senate, in this chamber that many such important decisions have been made in a place of deliberation, it is not only in this room that we as senators should be able to voice the concerns that we have about the direction of our country and the problems that our nation faces. That we get to be sworn in as United States senators. That we try to do our best, that we are U.S. senators, that United States senators, that we represent this entire nation as a body. And the idea that just as I just saw the video, one of my colleagues here thrown to the floor, handcuffed, humiliated. It is not a humiliation of that individual senator, it is a humiliation of this body. The shamefulness by which that was perpetrated. That Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, shame upon those that instigated this, that followed through on this. It is something that all of us collectively need to stand against. This isn't about partisanship. It's about what does this institution, what does this body mean, and whether or not our words and our actions, as dictated by our oath that we swear to the Constitution of Article 1 as well, that lays out what our job is, that is very much under threat right now. And I feel for my colleague. I don't know what is happening right now. I hope that we are able to get greater clarity about that. But what we see and what we saw in that video transpire, I hope that is something that every American in this country sees. that they see the actions that have taken place. And as someone who has worked in other nations, I worked in diplomacy and national security, I worked in nations with authoritarian leadership, I never thought I would see anything like this here at home. Transpire here in the way that we saw it unfold. Again, the humiliation befalls our body as a whole. Now the question is, what will the Senate do to stand up for ourselves? And that is something that I hope every single senator is thinking about right now. This is not a time to put your finger up in the air and figure out which way the wind is blowing. Try to think through what type of reaction might come from the White House if we speak out against this. This is a time for us to stand up together and stand up for each other and for this institution. And not just right now, it's about what credibility do we have as a body going forward. And I know, I get it, I'm new here. I'm one of the newer members here. I came here, I wanted to serve in this body because of what it stood for. I wanted to serve in this institution because I believe that this is an institution of incredible honor, integrity, and even at this challenging moment in this country's history, we need this body to be able to come together. So I call on all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to condemn this action, to stand united with one voice, standing up for ourselves. Otherwise, we will just cast ourselves to the margins of irrelevance in this nation right now. What point is it for us to stand up and show up to work every day if this is the kind of treatment that can befall any of us in this day right now in this country? I am outraged, and I hope others are too. This is not a time to be silent. This is a time for us to be united and show the rest of the country what this institution means. Otherwise, we might as well go home. I, for one, want to fight for my colleague, fight for each other, fight for the Senate, and fight for our democracy. With that, I'll yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator is not agreed to.
Mr. President, I ask to clarify, for colleagues' benefit, I ask unanimous consent that the remaining votes be 10 minutes in length.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from New Jersey.
I call up my amendment 2817 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New Jersey, Mr. Kim, proposes amendment number 2817 to amendment number 2360.
Mr. President, I rise today because every single one of us in this chamber knows someone who relies on home and community-based service workers to maintain their quality of life. Maybe there's someone with a disability who needs an aide to help with essential tasks. Maybe they're a senior who requires a home health worker to keep them safe and healthy. Maybe they're a constituent you've met or family member you love. All of them are dependent on someone who works hard every day because they care. We owe them the same level of care they give to those we love. That's what this amendment does. It strikes language that makes it harder for them to advocate for their own pay and conditions by adding the burden of needless red tape. It strikes language that makes it harder for them to ensure that they can provide the best care possible. Mr. President, the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that the number of home health and personal care aides will increase by more than 20%, nearly 1 million people by 2033. Millions of people will be working to help those we care about the most. I urge my colleagues to pass this amendment and stand with those who serve the people who need it most. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm proud that this provision, this breakthrough provision, has been included in the big, beautiful bill. This will provide much-needed relief for individuals with disabilities who've waited far too long to be on waiting lists to receive services. There's been a backlog, and this will help clear it up to the tune of billions of dollars. My colleague's amendment would completely undermine this very important effort. Ripping out important transparency and accountability provisions will divert intended resources for those who need it most in order to pay off public sector unions along the way. That's all this is. Medicaid exists to serve our patients. I've heard a lot from my Democrat colleagues about cutting benefits. It's all a lie. They're about to vote to cut off important benefits for the most vulnerable among us. So I'm tired of the lectures. This is actually a provision that does it. They're about to vote no. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, which again is nothing more than a political payoff for public sector unions and takes money away from the most vulnerable among us.
Questions on the amendment?
Mr. President, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Osterbrooks. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Blunt Rochester. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Thank you. Mrs. Britt. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. I got you. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Oh. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Fetterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Justice. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kim. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Lankford. Mr. Lee. Thank you. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody. Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino. Mr. Mullen. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, thank you, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: also Brooks, Baldwin, Bennett, Blumenthal, Blunt-Rochester, Booker, Cantwell, Coons, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Fetterman, Gallego, Gillibrand, Hassan, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Hirono, Kane, Kelly, Kim, King, Klobuchar, Kim, King, Lujan, Markey, Merkley, Murphy, Murray, Ossoff, Padilla, Peters, Reed, Rosen, Sanders, Schiff, Slotkin, Smith, Van Hollen, Warner, Warnock, Warren, Welch, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Banks, Barrasso, Blackburn, Britt, Budd, Capito, Cassidy, Cornyn, Kramer, Cruz, Curtis, Ernst, Fisher, Grassley, Haggerty, Hawley, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Justice, Lankford, Lee, Lummis, Marshall, McConnell, McCormick, Moody, Moran, Marino, Paul, Ricketts, Risch, Rounds, Schmidt, Scott of Florida, Sheehy, Sullivan, Tillis, Tuberville, Wicker, and Young. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Scott, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Mr. Cotton, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Graham, no. Ms. Collins, no. Mr. Mullen, no. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Schumer, aye. Okay. Mr. Kennedy, no. Mr. Hoven, no. Mr. Schatz, aye. Mr. Daines, no. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Bozeman, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 48, the nays are 52. The amendment is not agreed to.
The senator from New Jersey, Mr. Kim.
I ask that the further reading be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, public broadcasting has educated and informed and inspired generations, teaching important lessons to people of all ages and sharing powerful stories, including of our nation's veterans. One story at a time, the StoryCorps of Military Voices initiatives uplifts the humanity and possibility in all of us. Each week on NPR, they share stories to over 12 million listeners. Then there is the PBS program Veterans Coming Home, focused on sharing the experiences of veterans as they enter civilian life. The American Homefront Project breaks down challenges facing our troops, making sure we have conversations about what support military personnel and veterans need from all of us. The stories of our heroes aren't partisan, they aren't political. These are trusted, nonpartisan, powerful initiatives sharing the real experiences of our veterans, their families, and our communities, and reminding the rest of us of the price of freedom. Yet this rescission package before us threatens to eliminate over $1 billion in funding for public broadcasting, including these programs. That's why I move to recommit this bill and bring it back without these senseless cuts. We can't let the veteran stories and the voices of those who sacrificed be erased.
Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the motion that has been made by Senator Kim. 2 quick points. The first is that if this were actually to somehow pass, it would kill the bill because it would go beyond the July 18th deadline. Secondly, saying that defunding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting will somehow prevent Americans from receiving veterans' educational programming is patently false. Eliminating CBP doesn't do that, and it doesn't ban public stations from airing this kind of program. Of course they can. But what is true is that American taxpayers are tired of having to subsidize radical leftist programming they hear every single day and every single week of every single month, or watch every single day or every single week of every single month on NPR and PBS. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this motion.
The questions on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. The noes appears to have it. The noes do have it. The motion is agreed to. New Mexico.
Mr. President, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New
Ask that
Mexico,
further reading
Mr.
be
Lujan,
dispensed with.
moves to
Without
recommit.
objection.
Mr. President, my motion is simple. Public broadcasting infrastructure funding should not be rescinded if it limits access to emergency alert systems and life-saving weather updates. Just last week, devastating floods across New Mexico claimed the lives of 3 people, including 2 children. Local radio was on the air issuing real-time warnings and helping people get to safety. Despite these horrible tragedies in New Mexico, Texas, and the Northeast, my Republican colleagues are prepared to gut public broadcasting funding. Public radio stations and local media are lifelines, especially in rural and tribal communities. They don't just play music or share stories. They deliver emergency alerts, evacuation notices, and life-saving updates when disaster strikes. And it's not just weather. These systems broadcast Amber Alerts when children go missing, alerts where every second counts. Delays cost lives. Whether it's a flood, a fire, or a missing child, communities rely on these alerts to stay safe. Without funding and infrastructure, stations will collapse. One New Mexico broadcaster put it plainly.
Senator's time's expired.
If you give me a little more time, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask for a voice vote.
Without objection.
One New Mexico broadcaster put it plainly. Without sustained federal investment, tribal stations will be devastated and likely forced off. I encourage my colleagues to vote aye, and I ask for a voice vote.
Senator from New Jersey.
Yes. Mr. President, I rise today to raise my concerns about a vote we're about to take on the nomination of Stephen Myron for the board of the Federal Reserve. I rise because the scarcest resource that we have in politics right now is trust. And unfortunately, trust is also the most important resource we need to heal our broken nation. I took part in a hearing 2 weeks ago for the nomination of Dr. Myron, and I've had a chance to be a part of a lot of different confirmations here during my time in the Senate so far, and I've heard a lot of different crazy things, but still, one part of this hearing really stood out to me. Now, mind you, this is someone who previously said, quote, "To pretend that one can easily shift between highly political and allegedly non-political roles without letting political biases inform policy is at best naive and at worst sinister." Those are the words of Dr. Myron himself, talking about the concerns of politicization of the Federal Reserve, about the inability to be able to separate some of our political biases from the work that needs to happen at the Fed if we have people who are too close to the White House, too close to the president. He is someone who criticized previous Democratic nominees to the Fed positions for their closeness to Democratic presidents and for serving in their administrations. He even called for a cooling off period that would ban service in the executive branch following service on the Fed board. But in this hearing, we heard something altogether different, and it's something that caught my attention, which is that Dr. Myron, who currently serves as the White House at the top as economic advisor to President Trump, serving as the head of the Council of Economic Advisors, has no problem with himself being nominated for this role on the Fed board. In fact, because this role is to serve the remainder of a term on the Fed board, which is a few months, Dr. Myron has stated and confirmed to us in the hearing that he will not resign his position at the White House, even if he takes upon this role of serving on the Federal Reserve Board. He will instead take a leave of absence from the White House, which means that he will technically still be attached to the White House despite also serving on the Federal Reserve Board. This has never been done before. And I see this as a deep breach of trust. And I urge my colleagues, especially my Senate Republican colleagues, to demand that Dr. Myron resign from the White House if he is confirmed. This should be a requirement. Now, I asked Dr. Myron how he can square his past statements about concerns about the revolving door between politics, and in particular the White House, and nominees to Fed positions. And he said, he downplayed and said, oh, he was just talking about a package of reforms that haven't passed yet, and that he shouldn't be held to the standard that he himself put forward. I'll be honest with you, it was straight up painful to watch. He tried to excuse his behavior, saying that his attorneys had advised him to take this leave of absence. He was saying he was just doing what his attorneys told him to do. That is misleading. What he didn't say is that these attorneys are telling him what is best for his career, not what is best for the American people. I wanted to share this story because it's one of the most blatant examples that I've seen in my time in the Senate so far of a lack of integrity. To twist yourself in knots because you want a job. To betray beliefs that you previously stated that you hold central to your beliefs of the work that we're doing just because you want a job. I'll be honest with you, I don't understand that, and I think that that is a dangerous behavior. Now, what bothers me is that it really shows who a person is. Someone is willing to quickly and easily betray their previously held strong beliefs. What does it say about other things that they believe in? Why should I believe what Dr. Myron says about his positions on our economy, on interest rates, about Fed independence, when I see how quickly he is willing to change his mind when it suits him? He believes something until it is inconvenient for his career. But this raises a question for all of us to consider, which is, why does it matter to the rest of us? Why should we care? D.C. is filled with ambitious people. What does it matter at the Federal Reserve? For those of you watching, maybe you've never heard of Dr. Myron. Maybe many of us in this country can't name other members of the Federal Reserve Board. So why should we care about this nomination and what he has said? Well, what I hope we understand is the importance of this choice. We need to understand the role that the Federal Reserve plays in this moment and how Dr. Myron can almost single-handedly reshape it. The Federal Reserve, in short, sets monetary policy, the conditions that banks use to decide interest rates for your mortgage or auto loans. It sets them. Your banks, it regulates them to make sure that they're being responsible. The prices of your everyday goods, it determines the amount of money in circulation to keep those at a stable and reasonable costs. All of those things are important. They are part of our day-to-day lives, and the impact that the Federal Reserve has significant impact on our ability to save and to build wealth that we can pass on to our kids and our grandkids. Because these things are important, it's critical that the Federal Reserve be allowed to act independently. Independent of political whims, independent of political pressures, independent of political motives. The Fed's job is to execute all of those important tasks with your priorities in mind. We want people that have such a powerful role affecting our economy to be solely focused on what is best for our economy. That's why political interference must be constrained. I hope all of us can agree that we don't want a president, or any politician for that matter, being able to order interest rates to be lowered ahead of an election so that it could benefit them politically, right? That's something I hope all of us can agree would be wrong. then how is it that we can be okay with someone still listed as an employee at the White House to sit on the Federal Reserve Board? Oh, and the reason he gives, which is that this is a temporary appointment, that just makes things worse. Dr. Myron is hoping to get President Trump to nominate him for the full term after this temporary term ends. But because he's staying at the White House staff as a leave of absence, he's doing so to hedge his bets, just in case that doesn't work out for him, just in case President Trump decides to nominate someone else for the full term next year. So this exposes the heart of the problem, which is that this vote that we're about to take here in the Senate, that Dr. Myron thinks of this as just a tryout, as just an audition, as just an opportunity for him to be able to do this and try to stay on President Trump's good side, keeping his fingers crossed for Trump to approve of his work so that he gets the full nomination next year. Of course he will feel pressure to do as Trump wants him to do in the interim about interest rates and feel beholden to him. So either Dr. Myron can decide that he wants to remove himself from consideration of the full term next year, or he should do what he himself has said that we should have, which is a ban on people being able to do this revolving door. He should at least step up and say that he will resign his position at the White House if this vote confirms him for this position. Because these challenges and these conflicts of interest are exactly why Dr. Myron previously called for a ban on this revolving door between the Fed and the White House and the executive branch. There are many other reasons for senators to oppose this nomination, but I wanted to focus on this one because I believe a majority of senators agree with this lack of independence by this decision by Dr. Myron to be able to continue to stay at the White House. Stephen Myron has every opportunity to do the right thing and ensure no conflicts of interest occur, but he refused. He had the chance to earn the trust of the United States Senate and the American people, but he refused. But we here in this chamber can do the right thing. If Dr. Myron wants his nomination to go forward, he should commit to resigning from the White House. Otherwise, this chamber should not move and vote his nomination through. And with that, I'll yield back. Madam President.
The senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam President, I rise today because I literally just about 2 minutes ago finished a telephone town hall with over 5,000 people back home in New Jersey that joined up to try to figure out what in the world is happening to our government right now when they see just this abdication of leadership from the White House to leadership here in Congress to step up right now at a time of need. Thousands of people from across New Jersey that had called in worried about how this shutdown is going to affect their lives, how the healthcare costs that they are going to be experiencing are going to reshape their ability to be able to deliver care for those that need care the most. The simple story is they're scared. The people I talked to, they were nervous about what comes next. And frankly, they're pissed off about this. They know that this is not how a government should function. They know that, yes, we need to be able to step up and have negotiations, but how can you have negotiations when one chamber of this Congress isn't even showing up to work this week? That's right. When I told them about how Speaker Johnson didn't even bring the House of Representatives to work this week, even though they were supposed to, they were furious. If we're going to ask public servants to show up to work tomorrow, if we're going to ask our military to show up to work tomorrow without getting paid, the least that our Republicans in the House of Representatives can do is show up to work here. We should be furious about this. It's an abdication of leadership. It is a dereliction of duty. It is one of the most shameful things that I've seen in terms of just giving up on something that is so important, is going to have so much impact on so many people across this country. what I heard is they want us to be the adults in the room, to sit together, to be able to have the kind of dialogue. But instead, what we see is just this posturing and back and forth from Donald Trump, from leadership on the Republican side that hold the gavels here. And yes, the Republicans control the White House, they control the Senate, they control the House of Representatives, and the American people know that, and they know who is at fault for where we stand right now, that we are all about 3 hours away from a government shutdown. And this is something that I take personally. As someone who worked as a career civil servant before, I told my constituents today how I worked as a civil servant. I worked through multiple shutdowns before. Of course, I don't want to see us get to this place, and this should be an absolute last resort. But again, when they're not even bothering to show up to work, we know where their priorities land, that they have been moving towards this and barreling our country towards this for a long time now. So my constituents have every bit a right to be feeling pissed off about this. Because after we were already going through this in March, they see government once again not working for them. And they're right. Where have the attempts been over the past few months to work together to avoid this scenario? And again, it's not just about process. I don't want people to think that this is just some tug of war, that this is just some battle for political power, that this is just some challenge between political parties for who has the momentum on their side. There's real struggle. And I heard that on this town hall. We had people like Letitia from Camden who said that with the prices so high, quote, every choice feels like a sacrifice and the stress is constant. It's affecting how they're able to hold up and how they feel when they wake up every morning, what keeps them up at night. Still, she remains determined to advocate for families like hers who deserve stability, dignity, and hope. Or an urgent call from Barbara, who begged us not to back down from this fight. Laura from Brick, who called and urged Democrats not to back down from this fight, and was being able to say how concerned she was for just regular citizens to be able to make things easier for everyone impacted. She was asking, how can she help? She's asking, how can she help those that are struggling from the shutdown? She frankly wants to do more than what Speaker Johnson is doing on the other side of this building. Or people like Mick from Toms River, who although was trying to be an informed citizen and learn what was going on, was having trouble figuring out fact from fiction regarding this budget because it's just the sheer amount of disinformation and lies that we see out there in political rhetoric. Lies that are blatantly trying to smear and make it difficult for the American people to understand what's at stake. So yes, when we hear the Speaker of the House talking about how this funding, that this is Democrats that are trying to cut resources from FEMA or make it harder for people to get care through the WIC program for women, infants, and children. Well, look, it's just deception. Because what we already know is that that reconciliation bill that was passed, this is something that is estimated to potentially affect 3 million people, preventing them from getting care through the WIC program already. 3 million out of 8 million that get care now. So who is it that's actually hurting people's ability to get those services? And FEMA? Are you kidding me? I literally heard it out of the mouth of the President and the Homeland Security Secretary that they want to abolish FEMA. And here we are hearing it from the Speaker, making it seem like the blame is over here. These are things these are issues that people understand, like Jody from Manchester, who is concerned that with all the rising prices, that she will have to choose between being able to afford food or medicine because costs are simply too high for her to be able to afford both. No one in this country, the richest, most powerful country in the world, should ever have to make that kind of trade-off. Yet we see right now, we're on the cusp of it, not just 3 hours away from a shutdown, but over the course of tomorrow and the coming days, Americans all over this country will be getting their new bills when it comes to health care. And we see that tens of millions of them will have to pay more, possibly double what they're already paying, over 4.5 million Americans to lose their care, including many in New Jersey. that is a catastrophe that we see coming. We knew it was coming, and we were trying to take action to be able to address that. And what happened? Kicking the can down the road. When does open enrollment start when it comes to healthcare? It starts in November. So what good is it if we punt towards Thanksgiving, which is what this body tried to do? They need solutions now. They need answers now. And they're not getting it, and they're certainly not seeing anything that resembles leadership in this country right now. So yes, when I'm hearing from Lorena from Forked River, who says that, literally could lose her current health insurance if the ACA premiums go away, that's what we're fighting for. That's what I hope people see over the coming period as this continues on. Because I know it's so easy to make it feels like, again, it's just completely detached. And often it really seems that way. It feels like people here in the Senate, here in Congress, at the White House, that we're playing with other people's chips, that we don't feel it ourselves. I have to say, I found it disgusting when I learned in 2019 and I came into Congress that the president and members of Congress get paid during a shutdown, that they continue to get their salary while service members in our military and other public servants do not, even though they are showing up to do their work. We should not be held to a different standard. We should not be in a place where it seems like we're above the rest. Because that's exactly what the rest of the American people believe. They believe that we think that we're above the law, that we don't have to obey it, that we don't have to follow the rules that other people do, and that's why they are losing trust in this government. And I can tell you, come midnight today, they have every bit reason to believe that, because we have failed to be able to deliver for so many people. We had Lucinda from Whiting write in telling us, begging us to hold the line when it comes to fighting for health care. Because in her words, quote, I definitely cannot afford my ACA insurance without the advanced premium tax credits. If costs go up and health care gets more expensive, I will have to go without insurance and not go to the doctor. These are just a fraction of the thousands of calls and emails and outreach that we've received. We asked people to share their stories. We got over 3,500 stories back just this week about people's concerns about what's happening with this shutdown and losing health care. We need to recognize that a president who can't even be bothered to learn about the hurt that is being put forward by his own party when it comes to our health care, that our bill is not one that is looking out for them. We need leaders who understand what is going on. We need leaders who care about the people they are supposed to be leading. We need leaders who will actually be the adults in the room. And yes, so I rise today to make that promise to New Jersey and to the American people that I will keep fighting for you and fight with you as we go through this. And we're going through uncertain times. We're entering unprecedented times. And I know that it's a lot for everyone. But again, we remember why we fight here. That while I'm giving this speech, I'm worried about the care that my father's getting, and my father's health is declining rapidly. Every single one of us knows what it's like to have a loved one struggling when it comes to their care. And I know everyone knows that experience of saying that we would try to move heaven and earth to be able to make sure that they get the care that they need in their time of greatest need. And how can I, when I stand by thinking about 4.5 million Americans, including many in my state, losing health care, making it harder for them to be able to deliver for their family, how can I say that this is a time to roll over, that this is a time to stand down? No. We draw the line here. We fight for your health care. We fight for your lives, your ability to deliver for your loved ones, and to be able to stand up together and say, this is not how our government should work. This is not how our democracy should function. We deserve better. The American people deserve better, and that's what we're going to fight for. We're going to fight for better. With that, I yield back the floor. Unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today as federal servants, civil servants will check their mail or check their bank accounts and not see the money that they've earned. The money that they've earned for doing the work of the American people. Because hundreds of thousands of civil servants, including roughly 750,000 furloughed government workers, will sit down at the kitchen table tonight and ask some hard questions. Which bills do we pay? What do we do to cut back? How long can we go without a paycheck? These are tough questions, but they are only being asked because President Trump and Speaker Johnson and others have decided that they would rather plunge our government into a shutdown rather than address healthcare cost crisis for millions of Americans that are facing right now these incredibly challenging debates. Now, there are a lot of stories of our public servants struggling in this moment, and I understand that some of my colleagues haven't had a chance to hear them. So I wanted to come to the floor today to share my own story. I started my career as a public servant, as a State Department officer. I worked for the federal government. It was the honor of my lifetime. I emphasize that I was career, not a political appointee. I swore an oath to the Constitution, and I remember how proud I was to be able to raise my hand and recite that oath. I remember very clearly and vividly in 2013, I was working on counterterrorism, trying to keep our nation safe. And while I was doing that work of national security, political leaders on the Hill at that time hit an impasse, and our government went into a shutdown. I remember how distant that felt for me with the work that I was doing. I'm just trying to show up and do work every day to be able to keep our country safe, to be able to watch out for terrorist groups that try to do us and our allies and our partners harm. Why was it that now I was being asked to show up to work every single day and not receive a paycheck? In particular, I was very early in my career, not making very much money, turned down high-paying jobs so I could serve my country. And I did it because I was proud to be a public servant, proud to be amongst the many others that are willing to put our country before our own families, that we're part of something bigger than all of us. But through that period, when we were going through that shutdown, and to remind people, that one lasted 16 days. At the time, that was the second longest shutdown in American history. That hundreds of thousands of federal employees did not receive their full paychecks during that shutdown. And at the time, we didn't have guarantee and promise that we would actually get back pay for the work that we were doing. It was challenging. I remember having to call my own family and ask them what I should be doing. Try to think through what I can be doing to make sure that I can pay the bills when that comes up. Had no idea how long the shutdown would go for, and felt so distant. I had no way as a civil servant to influence the discussions on the Hill and the leaders that were making this decision. I remember reading afterwards, the Office of Management and Budget put together a report following the shutdown. And in that report, they quoted an EPA employee who spoke with the Washington Post. That employee said, quote, "We love public service. We're very committed to our jobs and the mission of our agency, but it's just too unstable." And I remember that instability. My story is not unique. And that's why when I was actually sworn into Congress in January 2019, now again, I was sworn into Congress in the middle of a government shutdown, a shutdown that has still to this day recognized as the longest shutdown ever. And I remember I was sworn into the government shutdown, and I found out something that just shocked me, which is that the president and members of Congress continue to get paid during the shutdown. I just could not believe it. That after what I had gone through as a career public servant, doing the work of the country, continuing to show up to work each and every day, not receiving a paycheck, then realizing that 435 people in the House, 100 people in the Senate, and the President of the United States continue to get a paycheck. They're the only ones in the entire government that continue to get paid. I remember at that point, I decided I was going to refuse my pay until the shutdown was over. And I'm continuing to do that with this shutdown because I still believe in those old sayings that officers eat last, that the leaders eat last, but that by taking our pay during this crisis, especially on this day when so many others are not, we are showing that we're fine having a full plate while others go without. That's not leadership. That is not acceptable. If leaders are being paid while others are not, you can see why so many Americans believe that politicians are playing with other people's chips, that they don't feel the impact of their actions. And that's dangerous because it's easy to then think about all this as a game and to lose sight of the actual impacts on American families. It's something I talked about with two public servants in New Jersey during the first week of the shutdown. These are federal workers who have so much on the line in this fight. But it's important to remember that for them, this fight didn't begin with the shutdown. The stresses that federal workers are facing didn't start on October 1st. It started on January 20th. It started with Russell Vogt, the scribe of Project 2025 and the director of the Office of Management and Budget, saying that he wants federal workers to be, quote, in trauma. Saying that he wants our public servants, the people that help educate your kids, pave your roads, keep you safe, to, quote, not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as villains. That's what the OMB, the current OMB director, the mastermind of this shutdown, has said, that he wants our public servants to be viewed as villains. And let me tell you something, that's something I heard from those federal workers I sat down with. So congratulations, Russell Vogt. Your dream has come true. These federal public servants I talked to said that they wake up every day feeling like they have been made to be like the enemy, to be viewed in that way by the American people. They talked about the shooting at the Center for Disease Control, the attacks upon public servants. That word, enemy, is something we've seen from President Trump himself. He's repeatedly used the phrase, quote, enemy from within, when talking about people who he perceives as his enemies. Fellow Americans who he thinks he's engaged in a war from within. I want to be clear. The people I sat down with earlier this month, they're not the enemy. They're not showing up to work every day to go to war against Donald Trump. They're showing up to work every day because they believe in service. They're showing up to work every day because they believe that they have an obligation as Americans to work for something bigger than themselves. We owe them better than what they're seeing right now and how they're being treated. We owe them better than a politics that demonizes them and their work. What we see right now, though, is that we don't even have, while our public servants are not getting paid through this shutdown, even though so many of them are showing to work, I can tell you they are furious that we have a House of Representatives that doesn't even show up, that we have Speaker Johnson continuing to give House Republicans a paid vacation, even though they're not even showing up to work and doing their job. And we also see the president and his mob boss-like cronies like Russell Vogt and Stephen Miller continuing to step up and use our government, weaponizing it as a tool for political retribution and political extortion. We owe our public servants better. We owe them not just an end to this shutdown, but an end to the politics that makes our public servants an enemy or a tool. Next year is the 250th anniversary of our nation's independence. It is a chance to reaffirm who we are as Americans and what we believe in. I believe in service. I believe in public servants. I believe that the way out of this tailspin that we're in as a country is to try to reignite a new era of public service in this country. Have a new ask not what this country can do for you kind of moment. And I believe that we must do everything we can right now to support our public servants by, first of all, having the House of Representatives get back to work so we can have the negotiations, we can have the discussions needed to be able to address the healthcare crisis impacting American families, and reopen our government so that every public servant can have peace of mind and dignity of knowing that their service has been recognized. It's time to support our public servants. It's time that we work to end this shutdown. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back the balance of my time. Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I rise today because more than 40 million Americans, including more than 800,000 New Jerseyans, are getting ready to sit down for dinner tonight, wondering if there will be enough food for tomorrow. Roughly 1 in 8 Americans rely on food assistance, and they're left asking if they'll be able to give their kids breakfast in the morning. Those are questions people in my state, in every state in this country are facing. And it leads me to this question that we should ask ourselves. How did we get here? How did we get to this place where things are so broken that American families are having to ration meals to survive? We are the richest, most powerful country in the entire world. Yet people, so many millions of families, have to ask this question of whether or not they will have enough to eat. Now let's start with President Trump. He's not just absent from any effort to end this shutdown, he's actively weaponizing people's hunger. Last week, 2 federal judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island ruled that the administration must use contingency funds or transfer authorities to continue SNAP benefits. Both courts found that it's unlawful for President Trump to hold up the money and benefits and found that emergency funds must be used to keep Americans fed during this shutdown. Now, yesterday, his administration told federal judge that they would use a contingency fund to pay half of SNAP benefits. But today, Trump made it clear he would defy the court order and won't pay anything unless Democrats stop our attempt to lower health care costs. And then the White House came out hours later to try to do some cleaning up, saying that they will comply. I don't know what to believe. No one in America knows what to believe. How can Americans that are hungry plan their next meal with this level of uncertainty coming from the White House? That's not leadership. Now, we know this president has the authority to make this pain stop. Now, during his first term, his own administration issued guidance saying these contingency funds are available if SNAP funds lapse due to a government shutdown. Now, during this second term, the pre-shutdown documents confirming the USDA would be able to continue funding SNAP have vanished. They're just gone, removed from the website. So, we know the authorities exist. We know the money exists. What we don't know is the willingness of Donald Trump to put American families ahead of himself. We have billions to send to Argentina, hundreds of millions for a new gold-plated ballroom, but money to keep food on the table of millions of families. Donald Trump doesn't think that's a priority. Well, of course, he's wrong. And that is one way that we arrive at this moment. The second reason why families are having to question where their next meal is coming from is found across the Capitol, where Speaker Johnson, just on the other side of this hallway, hasn't brought the House into session in more than 45 days. What would happen to the American people? What would happen to your jobs if you didn't show up for 45 days? Now, this is not just an abdication of responsibility, it is a dereliction of duty, and people will suffer because of it. There is real harm. It is not theoretical. So for these 42 million Americans, they're not asking for the moon. They're just asking for a little help to be able to feed their kids, to be able to feed their families in a time of need, to be able to just be able to provide and live a life of dignity and decency. Now, this is something that our government should do. What is the value of government if we cannot help people, our fellow citizens, in their time of need? It is at the core of what we do. And at a time like this, I find myself thinking back to Mr. Rogers' quote, always look for the helpers. We all know that line. And as I look around, I ask, well, where are the helpers? I look at the White House. I see corruption. I see cruelty. I look at the House of Representatives that has been on for nearly a 7-week vacation, getting paid while many government employees are showing up to work and not getting paid, worried about whether or not they're going to be able to pay the bills. While President Trump and House Republicans fail them, I see in my own home state of New Jersey people stepping up to be the helpers. I see people back home who have taken it upon themselves to do what the White House and the congressional Republicans have prevented us from doing. People like Mary from Medford, who as a teacher is personally doing check-ins with her students to make sure their families have resources as New Jersey heads into winter, while also organizing a Thanksgiving drive with her friends and family to collect winter items and food to donate to Camden. Or Pamela from Rocky Hill, who has taken it upon herself to purchase grocery store gift cards and sending them to AmeriCorps members across New Jersey who would otherwise rely on SNAP for monthly food costs. Or Leslie from Stockton, who is donating to local food banks in her community, who says, quote, "I feel very fortunate that I can donate food. No one in this country should lack a roof over their head, heat in their home, medical care, or nutritious food." I wish those words were coming out of the President of the United States. I wish those values were shared by the leaders in the House of Representatives that are not even showing up. And these are just snapshots of hundreds of stories we have received from New Jerseyans who have stepped up in their own communities by increasing donations to food banks, giving away their free turkeys from the grocery stores, volunteering more at local pantries across the state. The list goes on and on. Well, I want to close here by highlighting the last part of Mr. Rogers' famous quote. We all know, look for the helpers. What is not as commonly thought of is the sentences that follow. He says, look for the helpers, because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope. Mr. President, as my office continues to receive stories from all over my state, I'm just so proud to represent these 9 million Americans who left, right, or center, old and young, are currently stepping up. They are the helpers who give me hope. I urge my colleagues to listen to those back home in their states, those here on the floor telling stories from back home. We cannot allow Americans to go hungry. We cannot allow these games to go on with people's lives. We must become the helpers for those we represent. That is the true meaning of the job that we do here. While we carry the title of senators, ultimately what the people ask of us are to be the helpers that they can look to be able to help them in their time of need. And right now, that means fully funding SNAP so people in this country don't go hungry. And with that, I'll yield back.
I recognize the senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I rise today because since early September, Donald Trump has ordered our military to engage in 16 strikes in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. Those strikes have killed more than 65 people. Each one of those strikes, each person killed, was done without the necessary legal basis or proper justification to this Congress and the American people. And now, amid a buildup of forces in the Caribbean, the administration is even reportedly considering action against Venezuela itself. Mr. President, we are not powerless against this lawlessness, and that is why I rise today in support of this resolution. I rise because no president can unilaterally decide to use our military to target or kill anyone that they simply claim to be a threat. I rise because if we do not hold this president accountable, we abdicate our responsibility to be a voice for the American people and instead embolden Trump to intensify this conflict. I rise because these actions could quickly escalate into a conflict that could destabilize the Western Hemisphere and would put the lives of American troops on the line. I rise because as we see this president abuse the fundamental trust and purpose of our powerful military, both abroad and here at home in our own cities, it is imperative that we push back against his relentless lawlessness. And I've seen this from my own perspectives, whether that was working as a State Department officer embedded with the military out in Afghanistan, or my work at the Pentagon, or my work at the National Security Council, working to try to counter the terrorist group ISIS. I saw the importance of us being able to do that, but do it in a way that is in accordance with our own laws, to be able to both ensure unity as a government, but also to ensure that our service members who are fighting have the protections that they need, that they know that the entirety of our government leadership is behind them, and that our country is with them. But that is not what we have right now. The first step in fighting back against the lawlessness is understand the importance of the War Powers Resolution. Now, in this very chamber 53 years ago, Senator Javits, debating the overturning of President Nixon's veto of the War Powers Resolution, called the power to bring America into war, quote, most awesome power in the possession of any sovereignty. This resolution, he said, is about ensuring, quote, the broad representation of the people in the Congress, a voice in exercising that power. Now, Senator Javits reminded this chamber in the wake of the Vietnam War that, quote, wars cannot be successfully fought except with the consent of the people and with their support. What we've seen is a president in Donald Trump who thinks he can use that awesome power against anyone he wants, anytime he wants. And that is not what the law says. It is not what our founders intended. Our founders intended for the people to have a say in when we commit our sons and daughters to harm's way. Even in an emergency, the law requires the president to seek Congress's approval within a 60-day window to continue action. Well, in this circumstance, that window closed on Monday, with zero indication this White House will stop taking military action, even without clear legal basis to continue. And after they first recognized the legal parameters of the War Powers Resolution back in September, now the administration is arguing that they are not bound by this law. They've changed their tune, contradicting their own arguments in order to get around the law. Of course, that won't stop them from pretending they have legal grounds and fabricating justification where none exists. You'll hear them reference a list that designates certain cartels as terrorist groups. But the authority to pursue groups on this list provides absolutely no basis for the use of deadly force. And even worse, they still have provided zero proof of how they know the individuals they've targeted are linked to these cartels. Trump is simply giving himself the power to designate and then kill enemies without proper legal review or transparency to the American people. That is not a power any president should have alone, and we cannot allow this to proceed under our watch. After all, it will not be Donald Trump who feels the consequences of further conflict. It will be military families and the American people. That is why decisions of war require deliberation, careful consideration, and a clear legal basis. That is why they require congressional authorization. Through this resolution, we can uphold our responsibility to give voice to Americans on the safety of our troops and the security of our great nation. We need to give that voice in this moment because this is a crisis that can spiral into a conflict, and from a conflict into an all-out war. While Trump tries to claim their targets are boats from Venezuela, in reality, reports show strikes have hit boats from Colombia and apparently those carrying citizens from other neighboring countries. The administration has even admitted they don't know each individual identity of those targeted. To still execute legal strikes is a reckless and dangerous use of our powerful military. And as Trump considers expanding strikes to include land targets within Venezuela, and that's what we're talking about, within Venezuela, we move further towards a war that would destabilize the entire region. The American people don't want us to start a war within Venezuela, and their voices should be heard, not ignored by this president. Now, there is a final reason why I rise in support of this resolution. Because letting Donald Trump ignore the law abroad makes him think he has a free pass to do it right here at home. Donald Trump thinks if he can do this in the Caribbean, he can do it on the streets of Chicago. He could use the military for his own political retribution and consolidation of power in and outside our borders. After all, in his own words, quote, we're under invasion from within, no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. That's what the president said. We cannot be complacent as he already sends troops into our cities as a tool of intimidation against his political enemies. As I close here, I just want to say that when we know the American people are not blind to what Trump is doing, they know we're not powerless to stop him. It's time to step up and show them we believe in the law, that we believe in the voices of the American people, and that we believe in protecting our service members, and that we won't stand idly by in the face of lawlessness. So I hope all of my colleagues join me in passing this resolution. It's our power, it's our duty, it's our responsibility. Thank you. I yield back.